Hi, everyone. All right, let me just share my screen. Oh, it always feels like I'm back during the pandemic days when I give an online lecture, or the summer. A lot of my summer courses are delivered online. In any case, yeah, let's talk about the essay proposal. Then we'll get on to the essay assignment. And if you have any questions at any time, just let me know. You can jump in the chat. You can raise your hand. If you need to, if you forget any of this, don't worry because I will be posting this to my YouTube channel. There will be a link um, that takes you from Brightspace to the recording of the video. So it'll be up there and you can watch it again if you forget anything. But of course, if you have questions, if maybe I don't cover everything, you can reach out via email. But let's talk firstly about the proposal. So you have to submit a proposal by March 14th. It's Pi Day. It's on a Friday. So in March, submit that. It's worth 15% of your grade, and you're going to aim for about 300 to 500 words in total. Um, Anywhere in between there, you should be fine. As a means of preventing people from having generative AI write their paper, I have decided that you absolutely must use the template that I have provided. Failure to use the template results in an automatic zero. So, just to be very clear about that, use the template. It has instructions that you can delete and then fill in your own writing. So, you can fill in your student information and everything up at the top. Give it a tentative title. And basically, what you do in the proposal is you tell me what area you're going to be writing on. Give me a research question and an answer, or a thesis statement and a sort of outline of how you see the paper going. Additionally, you'll want to include a preliminary bibliography, and that's all there in the template. And you'll want to identify whatever sources you're thinking of using in that bibliography. I think I've already uploaded it. If I forgot, I will do it over reading week so that it'll be there well before the due date. But it should be there now. If you go to the course table of contents and you go all the way down to the bottom module, that's called the helpful materials module, and it has all kinds of well, it's exactly what it says, helpful materials, including this template. So you can find it that way. What the template will get you to do is identify an area of interest firstly. Now, so after giving it a title and filling out your student information, then you'll have to identify your area of interest, which can be anything to do with anything at all related to the themes of the course. So anything related to moral psychology. You're going to want to give me as much information as you can. I would say up to about a paragraph is good. So don't just tell me, I want to write about moral emotions. Okay, cool. I need more than that. You might say, like, I'm curious about moral emotions. I'm especially curious about what makes an emotion moral versus not moral. I'll probably focus on specific emotions in my paper, like guilt and shame, etc., etc., right? Give me as much as you can. And then you have to identify either a research question or a thesis statement. A thesis statement is one or two sentences that tells the reader exactly what you are going to try to convince them of in your paper. A research question and answer is really just another way of doing this. So you can pose a question and then answer it. The answer is your thesis. but you have to do it right away. So you do all of the setup and then you introduce your question. Tell the reader what right away, like in the proposal, tell me how you are going to answer your research question. Then it counts as a complete thesis statement. So it's very important that if you opt for the research question option, don't just give me the question, give me the answer that you're going to convince me of as well. I think five sources is probably good. More is better, but as a sort of bare minimum, probably five. And that can include one of the chapters in our textbook. Um, so after you've picked your area of interest and identified a thesis statement or a research question, then you're going to tell me your plan of attack. So your plan of attack is like a sketch of how you envision your paper. What will you do with the evidence that you're intending to gather? What kind of sources do you think you'll go and try and identify? What kind of argument will you make? I want to hear things like, let's say you want to write on the moral emotions, right? So you might tell me, I'll begin with a survey of what Jesse Prince and Sean Nichols say in their chapter on the moral emotions in, our textbook, right? From there, maybe you'll want to talk more about what the emotions are. So you could include, tell me some sources you're thinking of using there. Maybe some Richard Lazarus or something. Maybe Jesse Prince's book, right? Tell me what kinds of argument you're going to make. Like I'm going to argue positively that there are moral emotions, or negatively, like there really aren't moral emotions, etc. Don't tell me things like I'm going to go to the library and do research, right? That tells me nothing. Like I know, yeah, you're supposed to be doing that. You don't need to tell me that you're doing that. Tell me what specific sources you think you might like to use, um, or thinkers whose work you're going to look into further, right? So that's what you want to do for the plan of attack. Just give me the elevator pitch for your paper. The idea is that once you get your feedback on your proposals, you can take that feedback and use it to turn your proposal into the start of your paper. So you get your feedback. Maybe you've written 400 or 500 words in your proposal. You get to feedback. You turn the proposal into the start of your paper, maybe the first couple of paragraphs. So you can take your area of interest and your research question slash thesis statement and turn that into the first paragraph, and then maybe turn the plan of attack into the second paragraph, which describes what you will do in your paper to the reader. Um, that way you've already written almost a third of your paper just by virtue of rewriting your proposal, turning it into that first couple of paragraphs of your paper, right? And your papers, by the way, are due on April 26th. So that's the last day of the exam period. Because the essays, of course, are a take-home final exam. So you have from when you get feedback on your proposal until the very last day of the exam period. I recommend aiming for about 1,500 words. I know that's a little bit less than what it says in the course outline, but it's a big class, and I just think that 1,500 words is manageable. You can write a little bit more, but don't go significantly under 1,500 words. Now, this essay is worth quite a big chunk of your mark, right? 40%, together with the 15% that the proposal is worth. But we have you do the proposal so that you don't just go and write an essay and that essay turns out to be terrible, right? The essay is so that we can give you feedback, make sure that you're headed in the right direction, as it were, right? Um, you want to make sure you get this submitted on time. Likewise with the proposal, because there is a penalty for lateness. I will be penalizing 10% per day. Now, that said, I know that emergencies can arise, right? I know that maybe people get sick, people's computers break, anything can happen. We don't know. Um, if you contact me and you let me know what's going on, right? Like, Professor, I meant to have my paper finished, but I've got the flu and I just can't finish it. That's fine. Just let me know. Maybe your computer broke. Fine. Let me know. Use your phone and email me, right? Um, just let me know. I will work with you. I want you to succeed. I want you to be able to get your assignment turned in, and I want you to get a good mark on it. Uh, but if I don't hear from you and the paper is just late, I will penalize you by taking away 10% of your mark per day. So if it's a day late and I mark your paper and you would have otherwise got an 85, but it's a day late, now you get 75. So you move from an A to a B, right? And likewise, unless you contact me and you let me know what's going on. So I'm pretty accommodating. Like, people who know how I operate from having a class with me previously. Uh, oh, excuse me. You guys know. I tend to be pretty chill, and I will work with you to try and make sure that you're successful. But I can only do that if you communicate with me. So you don't have to be nervous. Like, if something happens, there's some emergency and you got to contact me. I just want to reassure you that you don't have to be nervous about reaching out. If you reach out and you tell me whatever's going on, I will work with you. And I won't penalize you. I won't brush you off. There's no reason to be, I know some professors are intimidating and some professors are like, well, too bad. I don't care that you were sick. That was the due date and that's it. I am not like that. I will not do that to you. Just keep the lines of communication open. Okay. Another very important thing is that with this final paper, not with the proposal, because the proposal you have to use the template. If you don't use the template, it's an automatic zero. For the student work, for the final essay, you must submit proof of student work. So what you're going to want to do is save drafts of your paper as you're working on it. So maybe you work on your paper for a week, right? And then at the end of the week, you decide, okay, I'm going to stop here, take the weekend, save that draft, call that draft number one, right? The next week, you work on a little more. By the end of the week, you call that draft number two. And do this a couple times so that you have 3 or 4 rough drafts and then the final draft. You can submit all of that on the Dropbox on Brightspace. There's no need to zip it or compress it all into a single folder. In fact, it's worse if you do that. Just put them all in the Dropbox and submit it. That lets me know that you have actually written the paper, as opposed to using generative AI. Failure to submit proof of student work results in an automatic zero. So these are very important things to keep in mind. Okay. When it comes to the format of the essay, obviously everything's going to be typed. I think you should use Microsoft Word because you all have access to it as Carleton students. If you download the Microsoft Office 360 suite and you log in using your Carleton credentials, then you have access to Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all of the things you could ever need, really. I know some of you might prefer other word processors, and that's fine. But your proposals and your essays must be submitted in either DocX, or PDF. So I cannot accept other file formats. So there's no Pages, no Google Docs. No. You need to submit in these 2 formats. That is it. That is all I will accept. If you submit in another format, I will not mark it. Like, I can't open other formats with the system that I have to use. So If you submit it in the wrong format and you don't get a grade back and you wonder why, well, that's why. Make sure, of course, to include a references and a bibliography section in your final paper and make sure that you cite everything properly so that you can avoid plagiarism. Um, yeah, I mean, you can take like scans or pictures of handwritten notes. Like if you want to start with an idea map and then a couple of drafts, I think that's also helpful. So that's fine. You can do that. So avoiding plagiarism, I just want to really draw your attention to the first one, which is generative AI. Any use of that to write or perhaps even edit your paper uh, can be construed as plagiarism. Otherwise, plagiarism is well, taking someone else's words or ideas and presenting them as your own. So when you're in any doubt at all, you want to cite, right? If you're direct quoting, you need um, proper in-text citation with a page number. If you're paraphrasing or simply referring to a work, well, even with paraphrasing, I like to see page numbers. But if you're just referring to a work, author name, year of publication in parentheses. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, don't use Grammarly. I don't recommend using Grammarly because Grammarly is using generative AI now. So yeah, there's no surprise it's getting flagged. Um, Honestly, if you're worried about editing, um, first of all, the spelling and grammar check in Microsoft Word is really good. You don't need Grammarly, right? Nobody really needs Grammarly. Um, the Microsoft Word is fine. There are also human options if you want to make sure that your writing is really good. You can go to writing services in the library and have a human help you because a human can explain why those grammatical errors are grammatical errors, right? Um, you can see if anybody on the Discord server wants to read your paper and edit it, and then you can read theirs and edit theirs, right? Um, that's fine too. There are human options, is what I'm saying. And whenever you use um, generative AI for editing, because these things are essentially just plagiarism machines, you run the risk of being caught plagiarizing. And that goes on your transcript, right? Like if I get a suspected case of plagiarism, I have to report that to the chair of the department, who has to report it to the dean. There has to be an investigation. And if you're found to have committed an academic offense, you can fail the assignment, you can fail the class. It goes on your transcript that you cheated, that you plagiarized something, and that follows you around. So don't do it, right? Just don't. And make sure you're, when in doubt, cite. Read the citation guides too, right? Like I cannot emphasize that enough. I recommend going with APA. You can use any one that you want. I like APA. Use it. It's good. But if you want to use MLA, that's fine too. But you should read the style guides, which are all available on the online writing lab through Purdue University. So there's a link to that here, and I think there's also a link specifically to the APA citation guide in the helpful materials module on Brightspace. Although if I'm wrong, I'll make sure to put it there. Um, so don't just use the citation generator. Read the style guide because it will also tell you um, how to when you need a page number versus when you don't. It'll tell you about how to introduce quotations, right? You can't just like cram a quotation in the middle of your writing. You've got to do it the right way. You've got to introduce it with some contour sentences. You have to, if you have one that's of a certain length, then you need to single space it and separate it from your text, right? And the citation style guides will tell you how to do that. There, yeah, there's a syllabus. We went over it on the first day of class. It's on Brightspace. So, yeah. Uh, any questions about citation? Yes, yes, you can. You can use different styles. You just be consistent. Stick with the one you pick. So if you pick MLA, use that. If you pick, Harvard or Chicago, that's fine. Just read the style guide for the style you've chosen to make sure you're using it properly. Um, and remember, when in doubt, cite. Another thing to watch out for, right? When people cite, sometimes they mention an author and then they mention the same author again and again and again, and they cite every time. You can cite once, and then you don't need to cite again unless it's a direct quotation, unless you introduce a different thinker. So cite Jones, 2008, and then Jeffries 97, and then you got to go back to Jones 2008 again. And, style guides. Okay, so questions about where the syllabus is are have been answered. This is about the essay. You need to go to the table of contents, um, and you need to look at I think it's course outline or course overview or something. It's in there. Okay, so what kind of paper? Sorry, everyone. What kind of paper can you write? Um, you can write a survey. Uh, well, you won't be writing a survey paper, but your paper will necessarily need to survey some things. Uh, so your whole paper won't just be giving an overview of something, but also an argument, trying to convince somebody of something, right? And you'll have to do this for part of your paper. If you're covering some literature, you'll have to survey that literature. But your paper's not going to be entirely like that, right? It's also going to have an argument. What kind of argument can you have? Well, you could have a positive argument. So that's where you argue for a particular position, or a negative argument where you argue against a position, or an adjudicative argument where you consider two or more positions and then you decide which is the best one and you try to convince the reader that you're correct. I definitely don't want to see any 5 paragraph essays because these are merely teaching tools. It's not really how we write an essay. So I still see this even in second and third year courses where people will try and write a 1,500 word essay that's only got 5 paragraphs, and the paragraphs are way too long. So each paragraph should really be like a step or a stage that gets you from the start of your essay to the end. And you want to use as many as you need to, right? You want to make sure that you have a good intro paragraph and a good concluding paragraph, but don't limit yourself to 3 body paragraphs. Use as many as you have to. And again, think of each one like as if it has a job to do. So, um, your first paragraph, your introductory paragraph introduces your topic and gives the reader, information about what you're going to argue. Your second paragraph might tell the reader how you're going to do it. Like, oh, first I'm going to review these thinkers, then I'm going to review this argument, then I'll compare it to this argument, then I'll adjudicate between them, and then I will conclude, etc. Right? It's not necessary to use headings, but you can if you want to. Yeah, I don't think it matters. In a paper this short, there's no need, but if you want to because you think it looks nice or because it helps you keep your writing organized, then absolutely go ahead and use them. Yeah. Um, but yeah, think of it, if you're starting from the bottom of the staircase and the top of the staircase is your conclusion, each paragraph is a step. And just one foot in front of the other. And each paragraph has a specific job to do. Explaining an idea, an argument, explaining part of your own argument, right? And again, a lot of helpful stuff on how to do this is you can find in those various style guides, right? And always remember that what you are doing is presenting an argument. In an essay, you're presenting an argument. Essay comes from the French, to attempt. Attempt what? To convince someone of your thesis. How do you do that? Well, with an argument, right? So if you take the thesis statement approach, then you need to have a sentence that expresses what you will convince the reader of, and you'll use an argument. You will use evidence and sound reasoning to do so, and try and keep it philosophical, right? I mean, arguments in philosophy consists of premises and conclusions, and you want your conclusion to follow from your premises. How do you make sure it does that? Well, make sure there are no errors of reasoning, so no logical fallacies, and make sure that all of your premises are true. And if you have those two things, you'll get a true conclusion. That's the beauty of it, right? Um, so make sure that the premises are all true, the conclusion is true, and that it follows from the premises. Try to keep your argument concise and straightforward. No need to overcomplicate things. Watch out for those fallacies, informal and formal. If you decide to do the research question approach, it's still the same sort of thing. You need to uh, provide the reader with an answer to your research question right away. And then the rest of the paper is all about convincing the reader that you have answered that question correctly. So you're still trying to convince somebody of something. You're just framing it a little bit differently. I personally like the research question approach because it's like kind of like dialectical almost, right? You can say something like, are moral emotions really different than non-moral emotions? In this paper, I will argue, yes, they are. And so it's important to distinguish between moral and non-moral emotions. That's a thesis. It's just framed a little bit differently, right? So make sure that in your introduction, you give me everything from the area of interest and thesis question statements or thesis statement or research question part of your proposal. So once you get your feedback, you can turn those bits into your first paragraph, and you can turn your plan of attack into your second paragraph, and that will form your introduction, and then some. Then the body is where the actual arguing takes place. Again, think of every paragraph as a stage or a step in your argument. And the conclusion is where you sort of restate what you put in your intro, but make sure the language matches, right? So the intro is going to be like, in this paper, I will argue that. In the conclusion, you'll say, in this paper, I have argued that. And by the way, when you're taking your proposal and you're taking the feedback that I or Karanvir give you, um, you want to make sure you change the tone so that it sounds more like an essay and less like a proposal. Some people just copy and paste and they don't even make any changes after getting the feedback. And it's kind of jarring because the first two paragraphs read like a proposal. And then after that, it reads like an essay and it just doesn't work. It doesn't flow, right? And I'll talk more about flow in terms of writing momentarily. One question I get, well, a sort of group of questions I always get concern the language you should use in an essay. I think you should try and aim for simple language. I don't think that you should try and make your writing sound smart by being verbose. right? By adding unnecessary verbiage, as it were. I don't think that's a good idea because we have to read a lot of these things. And I want them to be as clear and concise as possible. I want them to be as readable as possible. A good way to do that is to make sure you use a thesaurus and or a dictionary. But very important, thesauruses and dictionaries are not sources. They are guides, okay? So you should never use a dictionary as a source, especially since this is not an English class, right? You know, if you're looking at the history or the genealogy or the etymology of a word, that's one thing. You know, but I don't want to see anything like, say you decide to write on moral emotions. I don't want to see anything like the Oxford English Dictionary defines emotion as this. That doesn't actually tell you what an emotion is. That tells you how the word emotion is used. And that's why we don't use dictionaries as sources. So dictionaries are guides for your own writing to make sure you are using words properly. They are not sources. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of direct messages that don't have anything to do with writing a lecture, and that's what we're doing here. And I've answered questions about quizzes and getting the grades back in class previously. Um, so unless the questions are about the essay, please email me. Okay? Okay. So no sources, no dictionaries, no thesauruses as sources. Likewise with encyclopedias. I'll get to that later. Um, a lot of people also ask me about uh, pronoun use, like can you use I, right? Of course you can. I think that this whole not using I comes from certain styles, like MLA or Chicago. Like if you're an English student, chances are you've been told, um, chances are you have been told that you should never use I in an essay, but philosophers do it all the time. So I'm fine with that, right? You can use the first person pronoun I, but you can also use the third person perspective. So this essay will argue that, right? And if you're really feeling fancy, you can use the royal we. So in this paper, we shall argue that blah, 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 blah. You can do that too. One thing I caution people about, especially when it comes to punctuation, are things like colons, semicolons, and em dashes. If you use them right, it can make your writing look really nice and flow really well. If you use them wrong, it becomes a mess. So unless you're absolutely sure what you're doing with semicolons and colons and em dashes, don't use them. But if you know what you're doing, that's fine. And again, there are guides on the internet that can tell you when it is proper to use these kinds of punctuation marks. Likewise, be careful for grammatical issues, spelling issues, other punctuation issues, right? I don't want to see run on sentences and comma splices. I don't want to see sentence fragments. I want to see things spelled correctly. I want to see technical terms employed correctly. And this is why it's important to edit your paper very closely. And one way you can do that is instead of reading it in your head on your screen, um, read it out loud, print it out on paper, and read it out loud. And you will catch errors that you did not even know were in there. So definitely do that. Another thing you can do is swap papers with somebody. Oh, somebody's microphone is on. So you can swap papers. Like, go on the Discord server and, hey, anybody want to read my paper? I'll read yours. And you can edit, you can peer review, do suggestions for one another, right? I think this is good to do, actually, because, work is actually pretty collaborative these days. So, When you go, if you go to grad school, you're going to be working collaboratively with professors. If you go into the workforce, you're going to be working with other people. So I think it's fine if you want to read and edit someone's paper if they read and edit your paper. That's fine. Um, it's always good to have a second pair of eyes on your paper. Let's see. What else? We'll go on to the next slide. Oh, these are just some do's and don'ts. It's always good practice to write for like somebody who is intelligent but perhaps uninformed. That allows you to explain clearly rather than dumbing down. Assume, I do know about the topic, but pretend I don't. And maybe you want to write about like you want to explain what a norm is. Well, pretend I'm smart, but I've never heard of a norm. How would you describe a norm to someone like that? And then that's how you should write your paper. That's how you should explain technical terms. I also like to see inclusive language. I don't like to see mankind. I want to see humanity, right? Make sure you're using your technical terms properly. Watch out for fallacies, like informal fallacies. A big one that I see in undergrad papers might be something like the straw man, but there are others. I don't like those sweeping, overgeneralized statements that people start their papers with, like, since the beginning of time, mankind has wondered about morality. Well, no, no, we haven't. We haven't been around since the beginning of time. So don't do that. It's really kind of annoying, actually. You want to make sure your language is good. You don't want any malapropisms. Um, aside from, in addition to spelling, grammar, punctuation, make sure you're using your technical terms properly. Make sure you're using the right words. Sometimes people make very odd word choices, and those word choices actually change the meaning of what they're saying because they don't understand. This is why you use a dictionary, right? To make sure you're using the right words. Um, I'm trying to think of an example, but they're escaping me. Although I have seen a few where I don't know if it's because of a typo or because somebody heard a word and thought that it meant something when really it meant something else. But yeah, you want to watch out for things like that. Of course, you don't have to write some paradigm shifting paper, right? I just want you to write something that's clear and that features a convincing argument and uses evidence and sound reasoning to do so. And you want your writing to have a bit of a flow to it. So again, that's where reading an essay out loud can help, right? It can not only help you find errors that you will not have found before, but it will like it kind of tells you whether the writing is good or not. Um, if you can read your paper out loud and it sounds good, then the writing is good, right? Um, again, have your friend check over your paper, have somebody at Writing Services look at it. Maybe you can read examples of essays that you find online, although you have to be careful because you don't know if, how do you know if they're really good? Maybe it sounds good to you, but that paper actually didn't get a good grade, or it was written by AI or something, right? So you kind of have to be, you got to be a little careful when you do that, but sometimes you can find good examples. Maybe instead of reading example essays online, um, pay attention to what the textbook authors do in these chapters and how they write, and try and write a bit like they do, or a bit like the writing in whatever scholarly sources you identify. Speaking of sources, I highly recommend starting with the textbook and going from there. You can find lots of sources in the references sections of these chapters, right? I mean, look at all here in linguistics and moral theory. We've got like one, two, three, four, almost 4 pages of references there. We're not covering that chapter, but you get the idea. You can look at any one of the chapters that we've started on, that we've already read. I mean, and you can use sources that they use. Make sure whatever sources that you use are scholarly sources. So the number one scholarly source is always going to be journal articles, journals in peer-reviewed um, articles. But academic books are also good. Journalistic sources are good. Um, Lectures are fine. A lot of people ask me about citing YouTube videos. YouTube videos are not lectures, but sometimes you can find a lecture that's been recorded and posted to YouTube. You can cite that if it's relevant. But you can't cite YouTube videos. You can't cite, Crash Course, Khan Academy, Psych2Go. These are not academic sources. You want to use academic sources. Avoid Wikipedia. You cannot cite Wikipedia articles because and look, I love Wikipedia. Sometimes I read it for fun, okay? And I see where I end up. I start on one article and I start clicking through and I end up in some completely different place. And it's fascinating. I learn so much. But anyone can edit Wikipedia. So you can't use it. What you can do is look at the sources in the Wikipedia article, and if they are scholarly, you can use those, but you can't use the Wikipedia article. Lucas, yeah, go ahead.
So, uh, I something I do sometimes, if I can find them, is I'll get um a source from the bottom of Wikipedia if it's like an actual scholarly source, of course.
Yep.
And I'll try and use that as an example if it's relevant.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
fine. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. You can
And
do that.
what was the other thing I was going to ask? Maybe I'll come back to it after. Thank you,
Sure.
though.
Yeah, no problem. Um, I've already mentioned how dictionaries should not be used as sources, but also encyclopedias in general. And that's because encyclopedias are not um, they're not like journals, right? Journals are peer-reviewed, encyclopedias aren't. Encyclopedias are products that are sold by companies. They're not scholarly sources that are regulated by a body of academics. The one exception that I will let you use is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, because that is written by philosophers and it is managed by a university. So you can use the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You cannot cite the Britannica or anything like that because these aren't scholarly sources. They're products, right? Remember, back in the day, that's how you'd get encyclopedias. Chances are there'd be some salesperson driving around your neighborhood and would knock on your door and see if he could sell you a set, right? That's cool. We could call them references, but they're not scholarly references. Yeah. Yeah, good, Dale. That's right. Good idea. Make sure that you actually go and see that the source is the actual source that they say it is, right? Yeah. That is for Wikipedia. Um, because sometimes you're going to get broken links, right? So you might just copy the citation information, but maybe the paper doesn't exist. Maybe it was retracted and is no longer available, right? You don't know. So make sure you can actually go and get the actual source. And if you can't access it that way, hop into the Carleton Library and type in the source information and search for it there. You might find it in a different database or something, right? All right, so how do I tend to evaluate papers? Well, a paper in the A range is excellent. So you have an excellent thesis, a nice original thesis, really interesting, really cool, really well articulated. Your research will be good. You'll have identified all kinds of really good sources. Your argument will be really good, free of errors of reasoning. Your writing will be very good, free of errors, well, free of writing errors. The evidence you've gathered, you will use in a way that shows me that you understand it, not just in service of your argument, but the way you talk about the source, the way you explain it, as well as how you use it in your argument will show me that you have a really good grasp of what that piece of evidence says, right? So that's something in the A range. A paper in the B range is good. You know, it's got a good thesis, maybe could be a little bit better, and your research is good, but maybe could be a little bit better. It's well argued, but maybe could be a little bit better, right? Writing's good. Typo here and there, maybe a grammatical error here and there. No big deal. I can still understand what you're saying. It's good. Sources are good. You show me you understand them, but not as excellently as an A plus paper. A paper in the C range is satisfactory. So you're going to have a poorly stated thesis, or perhaps no thesis at all. Maybe you use a research question and you put the question, but you don't put the answer right away. Or you just write an introduction and it's not clear by the end of the introduction what you're going to be arguing. That's starting to get into the C range. Your argument will have mistakes, maybe errors of reasoning, right? You'll be committing some informal fallacies potentially. There will be noticeable problems spelling, grammar, and sentence structure, which impact the clarity of your writing. So, if the main thing for if that puts a paper in the C range for me is if there's a poor thesis or no thesis at all, and if the writing is so bad that I'm having trouble following what you are saying, that starts to get into the C and maybe even the D range where there's again a very poorly formulated thesis or no thesis, no argument or a poor argument. It's just so hard to make sense of what you're saying that it's bad, right? Almost nobody fails the essay assignment, but if you put in no effort, if you deliver a half-written paper, um, you could fail. If you commit plagiarism, you might fail. I don't actually make that decision, right? Like there's an investigation and um, a misconduct report might get generated, and then the dean will decide what happens, whether you fail the paper or fail the class, and then I input that mark. So almost nobody fails. Most papers will kind of be in the mid to high B range, is what I find in my classes. That's kind of where the average is. I do get a lot of A level papers, but not too many A plus papers. And to get an A plus, you need to do everything that you have to do to get an A, but you also have to impress me. A couple of ways you can do that. You can come up with something really cool and original, something that I haven't thought of before. That's a way to get an A. Or if your work is just like far and above the standard for a second year undergraduate class. So it's a second year undergrad class, but your work is like grad student level or fourth year undergrad level. That's probably going to be an A plus, right? So yeah, A plus papers are truly outstanding, truly outstanding, not just excellently done. They are like memorable. Like, oh, I remember that paper from back in the day that Johnny Student wrote because it was so good. Like that's an A plus. Um, so what could you write your paper on? Well, a couple of ideas right off the bat that I brought were um, you can do an analysis of an ethical dilemma in some piece of art, like a film, a TV show, a video game, a book, anything. I used to, well, that's what we're going to be doing during our special topics, actually, is I'm going to show you a film. We're going to watch a movie together, and then we're going to discuss the ethical quandaries introduced in the film. I don't know which film we're going to watch yet. I've got a couple lined up. But you could do this with maybe something that you're interested in. Um, an ethical or a moral psychological analysis of a character would be really interesting. You can also, if you want to do an adjudicative paper, you can consider some of the viewpoints in the book and perhaps adjudicate between them. So, you could adjudicate. Remember when we did the chapter on moral motivation? A really interesting idea might be to adjudicate between those four positions, right? The instrumentalist, the cognitivist, the sentimentalist, and the personalist. Um, so adjudicating between two or more of those positions might be good. Talking about moral emotions beyond anger and guilt might be good, or the evolution of morality. Anything really. It just has to have something to do with moral psychology on the one hand, and on the other hand, it has to convince the reader of your thesis or the answer to your research question. Other than that, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can write on. So I wonder what some of you are thinking of writing on. Maybe we'll get inspired by talking about this. Well, yeah, what are some examples that we could do? Well, it's okay if you haven't thought of an idea yet, because I want you to think about this over reading week. But I will say that the one time I will allow for the use of generative AI is brainstorming topics. So, you can't use it for writing or editing, but if you want to talk to ChatGPT and tell it that I'm taking a moral psychology class and I need to come up with an idea for a 1,500 word research paper. What could I do? And maybe get it to give you five ideas. And then you pick an idea and turn it into your proposal. That's probably okay. So if you're really stuck, I think it's fine if you want to do that. Just remember not to use it for any writing or editing. And also if you do this, acknowledge that you did it. And this is not a trick, by the way. Like just say, I gave this prompt to Chat GPT and it suggested this topic, and I decided to do something like that topic. Uh, that's fine, right? That's just about being transparent. Yeah, so yeah, you could write about a character or a moral dilemma in some piece of media, or about how people morally reason about current moral dilemmas. Currently there's lots of things going on in the world, um, that people feel all kinds of ways about it, and you could apply what you've learned here in moral psychology to that. Yeah, that would be an interesting idea, like moral emotions and mental illness. So, one idea there might be, normally our emotions are meant to indicate that significant things are going on, things that are significant for us, but certain mental illnesses that doesn't work properly. Does that mean that mentally ill people can't be moral? Right? You could ask that question and you could answer, hopefully, that no, that does not mean they can't be moral. Right? But those are the sort of questions you might want to consider. Jim says, thinking of analyzing how intelligence can reconcile the apparent trouble-free philosophical pursuit of the good life with the real trials and tribulations of natural selection. Yeah, so that sounds pretty interesting to me. Um, yeah, yeah. That would be that's a very ethical topic, and I mean ethical not in the sense of right and wrong, but in the sense of like how we should live. And I think that's fine. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Lucas, go ahead.
I recently heard a quote that I found quite interesting, which was something along the lines of um, the death of democracy is the marriage of state and I think it was like like private industry or something like that.
Yeah.
So like looking at the ethics of having government run combined with corporation, like kind of like what's being shown in the States right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be good. You just have to add a moral psychological spin to it. So you might also ask why or why aren't people are okay with this, right? And there's a lot there.
Okay.
I don't want to be all doom and gloom on you, but like, I'm not saying that America is going to descend into full-on fascism, although it sure seems like some people are flirting with it. But in 1930s Germany, the Third Reich, there was a similar marriage between authoritarian government and private industry. In fact, the Nazis were very gung ho about privatizing a lot of government stuff, and we saw how all that went. Why were people okay with that then? Well, there is a lot of research on that you can draw from to maybe inform why people are okay with, oligarchs in the United States or in Russia, right? So you just have to kind of put like a moral psychological spin on it.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Um, Suniti says, I'm not sure how I do this yet, but I was thinking to connect moral emotions and psychopathy, but I'm worried it will end up too psychology focused rather than philosophy. No, I think you'd be fine with that. Because the moral emotion stuff is what makes it philosophical. And there'd be a lot to do there. Like psychopaths probably don't experience fear the same way that a lot of other people do. And fear might be a moral emotion. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. That sounds like the exact kind of topic that we would want in a class. And psychopaths are really interesting. Like we're not really covering psychopaths per se, but psychopaths are a great object of discussion in moral psychology. So you could write your paper on psychopathy and relate it to the themes of the class. That would certainly be fine. Dale says there are two types of disgust: protective, as in injurious food, and moral. Ah, does moral disgust really exist, or is it a justification of? Yeah, okay, so there you go. There you go. There's like a research question right there, a really good research question. And then you would just have to answer, in your paper, like, I'm going to argue that it's this way as opposed to this other way, right? But yeah, Dale, that would be awesome. You can also go ahead in the book. There's some stuff we haven't covered yet, like well-being. And that's fine. You can write on well-being. Just read ahead. Just read ahead. And you can ask me, if there's any questions, you can ask me. I think I also have old lectures from a previous iteration of this course on my YouTube channel. So if you want to write about something that we haven't covered yet, you could go watch one of my older lectures on it. Those older lectures are, I mean, I've updated things since then, but it would still give you enough guidance, I think, if you wanted to start working on something that we haven't covered in class yet. Um, and those are all on my YouTube channel. You just have to sort of search through all the different playlists I've got. What else? What else are we thinking of? It's good if you can make your thesis or your area of interest or whatever as focused as possible. That's a really good piece of advice that I think I ought to share. You want your area of interest to work like the hook of a catchy song. You want it to really like get the reader's interest. You want that thesis statement or the research question and answer to really hit the reader, to really drive home what your paper's about. And likewise with your conclusion, you want the conclusion to feel like, bam, we got it. We convinced them. Mic drop. That's what you want, right? So you want a hook, a nice, forceful, I say punchy thesis. You want it to be punchy, like like a fighter with lots of moxie or whatever. You want your thesis to really like pop, make it apparent that your thesis is your thesis, right? Let's see what else. We still have a little bit of time left if we want to try and generate more ideas. I wonder, I don't think this is the kind of book that has discussion questions at the end of the chapters, but I'm pretty sure there aren't. It would be cool if there were. But yeah, there aren't discussion questions, but sometimes the authors ask questions in their chapters that and then they say, well, this is kind of beyond the scope of this chapter. But you could write a paper on one of those questions, right? So that's an option. But yeah, I realize it's a big ask, make your thesis, your area of interest as focused as possible while also, having this vast array of possible topics to choose from, anything to do with moral psych you can choose from. I know it's a bit tricky, but that's part of the exercise of doing this, right? If I just give you a list of topics, that's fine, but that's also doing a lot of the work for you. So, um, when it comes to picking a topic, I always suggest picking something that you keep returning to, that you keep thinking about, something that keeps those wheels turning in your mind, right? Um, if there's an idea or a topic like that from this class that you just keep thinking about, keep coming back to, that's probably what you should write your essay on, right? Because that means, you're going to be interested and engaged with it. It's going to be fun to write. It's going to seem less like work, and you're going to learn something and satisfy that curiosity, which is part of the reason why maybe you keep returning to those questions. So, if there are questions or subjects like that you find yourself coming back to and thinking about, that's probably what you want to generate your topic from. Right. Well, yes, multiple people. Yeah, yeah. Like it's not like you can only one topic per person, right? If so a couple of you are like, I'd like to talk about moral emotions and psychopathy. Yeah, totally. Do it. Or you can change it up. Like an interesting comparison might be the differences in terms of empathic abilities between psychopaths and non-psychopaths. Um, that might be fun. It might be fun to talk about, like someone said, mental illness and moral reasoning, neurodivergence and moral reasoning. So, like, it's kind of a stereotype that Um, psychopaths have cognitive empathy but lack affective empathy, and people on the autism spectrum lack cognitive empathy but they have affective empathy. But it's not really that straightforward, right? So that might be something to talk about. Um, you can relate moral psychology to politics. Right. What are the differences in moral reasoning in terms of where we fall, on that sort of continuum between left wing and right wing, right? That's something that Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of research on. So there would be a lot there to draw from. You can talk about really the psychology of how we reason about any particular moral theoretic issue. So if you want to write about like animal rights or human rights, um, and how people reason about the rightness or wrongness of how we treat, um, humans or non-human animals, that's a great topic. There's lots there. You could look at whether non-human animals have morality, right? Like Lemaitre, the 18th century French thinker, argued that animals have a share of the natural law. Animals have morality, he said. Where somebody like Descartes, a century or so earlier would have said, no, only humans have that. So, is morality something that only humans have? Right? This gets us back to the first chapter, the evolution of morality, right? Are there evolutionary homologs to morality and other non-human animals? I think you could make an argument, yes or no. I think you could argue right away. Although I think when you're talking about social animals, the answer is probably yes. But that might be hard to show, as we saw with the experiment with the capuchin monkeys, right? So, yeah, the sky's the limit. There is so much you can talk about. So take reading week and think about it. That's when I have the best ideas, when I'm not working on them, right? I'm done first few weeks of school. I'm gonna go on reading week, not think about anything, and then randomly while I'm like washing the dishes or something, boom, that's when I get my idea for my essay. That could happen to you. So, just kind of keep all of this in the back of your mind, right? What are the conditions for ascribing blameworthiness? No, that's fine. That's good. Because look, you can relate that to our psychology. Like psychology and philosophy are like this, right? They can be like this. It's just that one is descriptive and the other is normative. So philosophy, moral philosophers might say when you ought or ought not to blame. Psychologists will tell you about how the mentality of all of that works. But the two can go hand in hand and really complement one another. So it's fine. You can lean more towards the philosophical or more towards the psychological. I'm fine with either one. Yeah. And I realize people are coming at this from different backgrounds. So, if you're a philosophy student, you want to keep it philosophical, that's fine. If you're a psychologist who wants to keep it psychological, fine. If you want to mix it up and be like a cognitive scientist, that's great. It's all good. Just make sure it has something to do with the themes of this course. All right. Any other questions? There's a few more minutes, and but I do have to go trudging through the snow to run a quick errand. So it would be nice to do that before it gets too dark. But we do have a few more minutes in case anyone has any other questions. So I'll field those questions now, if there are any. And they've got to be essay questions. I guess everyone's good. Okay. Well, that's fine. If you think of a question, remember that you can always email me. I will be answering emails over the break, so there's no problem there. Um, and of course, I'll be posting this online. So anyone with who missed it or who maybe they have a question that was already answered by the video, you can watch this again, and all the instructions are there, right? I will be making a series. I don't really have one set rubric that I use other than like this kind of stuff. But I will be making um, some example rubrics available that are quite helpful. I don't follow them to a T. I honestly I tend to rely on my expertise here because I've been doing this long enough to know what an A paper looks like versus what a B or a C or a D looks like. Um, but you may find those helpful, and those will be in the helpful materials module. The citation guides, don't just use the citation generators. Read the style guides. When I was in university, I don't think I have any at my desk, but you would have you'd have to go buy your textbook, and then your professor would also have you buy a style guide for whatever style you were using, right? And every prof had a different one. So my first year, I had like five different style guides, one for each class. Now it's all online, but you learn a lot in those little style guides about how to write. And when I was in undergrad, profs didn't do this. Profs did not give you an essay on how to write how to write a. They didn't give you a lecture on how to write an essay, right? So, um, you just had to go and buy a style guide and read it. I've given you that lecture, but it still would be good practice to read the style guide because that will tell you how to write. And you want to write, dialectically, right? I'm going to argue this. This thinker says this, but I say this. Do, 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 do. Dialectical progression, one paragraph to the next to convince the reader of your claim. Okay, that's all I can think of. But again, you're welcome to reach out at any time over the break if you have questions. Just to reiterate what I said for those who asked me non-essay related questions, um, I'm aiming to have the quizzes marked sometime over reading week, and I'll post the grades, and then I'll return your quiz booklets the week after. Um, I hope you all have a safe and relaxing reading week. If you're traveling, be careful. If you're sticking around, still be careful. We get winter storms, obviously. So take care of yourselves, have a good break, get some rest, and I'll see you all when we come back. So, bye for now.